about Free Monday Virtual Edition at the Canton Museum of Art. Please enjoy this video, which goes over various printmaking techniques and talks a little bit about the project that we're going to be doing today. So what is printmaking? The Metropolitan Museum of Art says that printmaking is an artistic process based on the principle of transferring images from a matrix onto another surface, most often paper or fabric. Traditional printmaking techniques include woodcut, etching, engraving, and lithography, while modern artists have expanded available techniques to include screen printing. A matrix is essentially a template that can be made of wood, glass, metal, or silk. The design is created on the matrix by working in its flat surface either with tools or chemicals. The matrix is then inked in order to transfer onto a desired surface. To print from a matrix requires the application of controlled pressure, most often achieved by using a printing press. This creates an even impression of the design when it's printed onto paper or fabric. For more modern printmaking techniques, such as screen printing, a press is not required. However, you're required to take a squeegee and place pressure over the ink on the squeegee with your hands by pulling it across the silk to push the ink into the paper from the back of the screen. I'll go into all of this a little bit more in detail in the upcoming slides. I'm going to begin today by talking a little bit about screen printing. Screen printing is probably the most recognizable type of printing that you're used to. Screen printing is kind of like making a stencil on a piece of silk, and often screen printing is the way that images are printed on things like t-shirts and backpacks and posters and things like that. While traditional screens used for screen printing were made of silk, today's screens are mostly made of polyester and other synthetic fibers. Once the mesh is stretched across a frame, the mesh is made into a stencil by the artist painting on what's called a photoemulsion. A photoemulsion is a chemical that hardens when it's exposed to light. And what's cool about this process is that you can paint with the photoemulsion, and everything painted on and exposed to light will harden. So those parts basically become like a hard plasticky layer, and whatever is not covered by photoemulsion, the ink can get through to print on paper or fabric. In this image, courtesy of the Andy Warhol Museum, all of the steps of the screen printing process are basically laid out for us to look at. The yellow screen in the bottom right has no image on it, while the screen being held in the image does have an image printed onto it. Once photoemulsion is painted onto the back of the screen, it is put into a light box like the one that you see open to the left. In the front of the image, you can see all of the finished pieces that the artists made using the screen that they're holding. Many artists choose screen printing as their method of making because they can easily make multiple images using multiple colors. A telltale sign that something has been screen printed is when you look at an image and you see that there is very little variation in the color. In the image coming up, you'll see that there are 4 distinct colors and the white of the paper. The colors are a dark blue, a black, a green, and a red. In order to make a screen print with multiple colors, you have to have multiple screens, one for each color. This can be a little tricky. In order to make a print with so many colors, like this Fröhling Spring by Arwed D. Gorella, you would have to have 4 different screens, one for each color. How do you think that the artist would line up all of the screens to lay perfectly on the image? They do this by a process called registration. Sometimes, if you look really close at a screen print, you can see that the registration might be a little bit off. Maybe there's a color that's just slightly outside of a line. Have you ever seen a screen print like this? Let's check out one from our collection. Andy Warhol was an artist who is most famous for his use of screen printing in his art. In this image, entitled Liz, of actress Liz Taylor, Andy Warhol's registration was just a tiny bit off. Andy Warhol printed a lot of his images in a way where the registration was just ever so slightly off to create a hand-done effect on his screen printing. You can see where the artist chose to move the screen just a little bit to the right when he placed the black screen on top of the red background. You can see this by the red line that goes down the right side of Liz Taylor's face. Now that we've talked a little bit about screen printing, we're going to shift gears and talk a little bit about etching and intaglio. Etching is a process where an artist takes a tool and scratches an image into metal. After carving their image on the metal plate, an artist will ink up the plate by rolling a brayer covered in ink across it. The artist will then take a towel or some kind of cloth and wipe away all of the ink on the surface of their plate until the only ink left is in the incised lines on the plate. The artist then will put the plate on top of a piece of paper and roll it through a printing press, which presses the plate into the paper with over 100 pounds of force. This pressure causes the ink from the lines to be deposited into the paper. Intaglio is a similar process to etching, except an artist uses a copper plate covered in wax. Instead of etching the image directly onto the copper plate, the artist will etch into the wax and then drop their copper plate into a vat of acid. The acid will eat away all of the exposed copper, but will not harm the wax covering on the top. Once the plate is removed from the acid and cleaned off, it's ready to be inked up like a traditional etching plate. Let's look at an etching from our permanent collection. Is there anything that you might see in your daily life that you think could be an etching? US dollars are made using etched plates to print on top of the paper. Now that we've learned about etching and intaglio, let's learn about relief printing, such as woodcut. Relief prints are made by an artist carving into a block, and whatever is not carved is the image that is printed. You can see here that this block was made out of wood. A lot of artists who do relief printing use wood blocks to carve. However, some artists use materials such as linoleum, and you can even use styrofoam to make your own relief print. This piece by Frank Eckmeier from our permanent collection is a great example of a woodcut on paper. If you were to think of this surface as a piece of wood, all of the parts that are white would be the parts that were carved out, where the parts that are black are the parts that are not carved. Some artists will do multicolor wood prints, where they carve out one small section and print a whole large section, and then carve out a little bit more and print in a second color, and then carve out a little bit more and print in a third color, and so on and so forth. While multicolor wood block prints do exist, this one is just a single process wood block. Now that we've talked a little bit about relief printing, I'm going to talk to you about lithography. Lithography is a printmaking process in which an artist uses a stone as the surface of their plate from which they print onto paper or fabric. Lithography is an interesting process because it allows artists to draw directly onto the piece of stone with a special crayon used specifically for lithography printing. There are a lot of different chemicals and processes used in lithography, but basically, the part where the image is drawn on is kind of greasy, and it adheres to all of the ink that is inked up onto the plate. You can wipe away the rest of the ink, and the ink will stay kind of like in the lines of an etching, only on the greasy part of the stone. Then, after that's done, you can lay a piece of paper or fabric or even cardboard on top of your lithography stone and run it through a printing press, specifically for lithography, and the image will be transferred onto the surface that you're printing. A lot of lithography images that you see are done with one color, but a good thing about lithography is you can get many different variations of dark and light. So you can create a lot of value in a print by making a lithograph. Now, while most lithographs you see are single color lithographs, color lithographs also exist. Let's check out one from our permanent collection. This image by Romare Bearden, called In the Garden, is a color lithograph from the permanent collection at the Canton Museum of Art. Now, we've talked about many different printing processes in which an artist uses printing so that they can make multiples of the same image. The last type of printmaking I'm going to tell you about, and the type of printmaking we'll be using today in our endangered species prints, is monotype. Monotype printing is a type of printing in which an artist paints something directly onto a plate. To get the monotype sort of effect on this image by Yuko Kimura, I suspect that she painted the blues and the browns onto a plate and then maybe sprinkled it with water or sprayed it with something that would create a raindrop effect. While you can only make one image using the monotype process, monotype is a special sort of process because it blends painting, drawing, and printmaking into one. Today, we're going to be making monotype prints using some things that you might have around your kitchen. Hopefully, you've already read the list of things that you'll need, but just in case,
our Zoom meeting,
you're going to need some newspaper to lay down to make sure that things don't get too messy.
using things that we have around the house.
You'll need a baking pan, preferably a glass one, but a metal one will work too. You'll need some Q-tips, a paintbrush or a rolling brayer. You'll need some gloves if you don't want to get your hands dirty. You'll also need a piece of paper to print on, and a wooden spoon to rub the back of your paper while you're printing to create the pressure that you'll need to make sure that your image really sticks to the paper you're working with. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you're enjoying all of the fun things that we had planned for you on this virtual Schools Out Free Monday.